October 14, 1961, West Berlin. Nicholas Meyer watched the last rays of autumn sunlight disappear behind the newly erected concrete barrier that now divided Berlin. The wall had been up for just 2 months, but it already felt like a permanent scar across the city's landscape. From his apartment window, he could see East German guards patrolling, their breath visible in the chilly evening air. Nick adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and turned away from the window. The small apartment was sparsely furnished. A desk covered with diplomatic papers, a modest bookshelf, a record player, and a bed that had remained unmade for days. Standard diplomatic corps housing for a mid-level U.S. State Department officer. He moved to his desk and pulled out the bottom drawer, removing a false bottom to retrieve a small notebook. Inside were columns of numbers, not the trade statistics he was officially tasked with analyzing, but something far more valuable and dangerous. The telephone's harsh ring startled him. Nick quickly replaced the notebook and closed the drawer before answering. Meyer speaking. Nicholas, it's Ambassador Reynolds. I need you at a reception tonight at the French embassy. The trade minister from East Germany will be there, and we need someone who speaks German fluently. Of course, sir. What time? 8 sharp. Formal attire. Nick replaced the receiver and glanced at his watch. Just enough time to shower and change. As he selected one of his 3 suits, a navy blue one that had seen better days, Nick considered his position. 3 years into his diplomatic posting, he was known as reliable but unremarkable. His colleagues saw him as the quiet bachelor who could be counted on to translate documents and attend functions when needed, but never quite stood out enough for promotion, which was exactly how he wanted it. Nick believed in a simple principle: the truth deserved to be known. Not the propaganda from either side, but the unvarnished reality of what was happening behind the Iron Curtain. What his supervisors didn't know was that Nicholas Meyer, with his perfect German and unmemorable presence, had become something else entirely when he crossed into East Berlin on diplomatic business. The French embassy glittered with chandeliers, and the soft murmur of diplomatic niceties exchanged in multiple languages. Nick moved through the crowd with practiced ease, balancing a barely touched glass of champagne. He nodded to familiar faces from the Western Diplomatic Corps while scanning the room for the East German trade minister. Meyer, there you are. Ambassador Reynolds appeared at his elbow, a jovial man with thinning hair who had spent decades in diplomatic service. Come meet Herr Schroeder. The East German trade minister was a stocky man with cold eyes that evaluated Nick as they shook hands. Herr Schroeder is interested in discussing possible textile imports, Reynolds explained. Nick nodded and began conversing in German, watching as Schroeder's initial suspicion gave way to slight relaxation at hearing his native tongue spoken flawlessly. You speak like a Berliner, Schroeder commented. Where did you learn? My mother was German. From Dresden, Nick replied, using the cover story he had maintained for years. In reality, his German had been honed at a specialized language facility in Virginia before his posting. As they discussed the mundane details of potential trade agreements, Nick noticed a woman hovering at the edge of their conversation. She wore a simple black dress, elegant but not ostentatious like those of the Western diplomats' wives. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe style that did nothing to diminish her striking features. Schroeder followed his gaze. Ah, Fräulein Geller. Come meet the American diplomat. She stepped forward. Natalia Geller, cultural attaché, East German mission. Her handshake was firm, her English accented but precise. Nicholas Meyer. A pleasure. Their eyes met briefly, and Nick felt an immediate tension. Not attraction, though she was undeniably beautiful, but something more complex. Recognition, perhaps. The awareness that comes when 2 people engaged in the same dangerous game encounter each other. Later, as the reception wound down, Nick found himself alone with Natalia on a balcony overlooking the garden. "Beautiful night," he offered, lighting a cigarette. "I'm not here to discuss the weather, Mr. Meyer," she replied quietly. "I have a message for you from Finch." Nick felt his pulse quicken but kept his expression neutral. Finch was the code name for his contact in East Berlin, a professor who had been passing information to the West for nearly a year. "Finch is compromised. The Stasi conducted a search of the university offices yesterday. They took his papers. Was he arrested? Not yet, but he's being watched." She glanced back toward the reception. "He wanted me to tell you. The bird has flown its last mission." Nick took a long drag on his cigarette to hide his distress. Finch had been his most valuable source on the forced labor practices in East German factories. His reports had provided crucial documentation of human rights abuses. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Who are you really?" Natalia's eyes hardened. "Someone who believes the wall must come down. Just like you." Before he could respond, she slipped back into the reception, leaving Nick alone with the knowledge that his network was beginning to unravel. The next morning, Nick entered the American mission with his usual punctuality. He nodded to the Marine Guard and made his way to his cramped office. The daily intelligence briefing waited on his desk in a sealed envelope. One of the privileges of his position was access to classified material that ostensibly helped inform his economic analyses. As he read through the briefing, a paragraph near the end caught his attention. "Stasi counterintelligence activity has increased in East Berlin university circles. Surveillance noted unknown Western sympathizers." Confirmed what Natalia had told him. He wondered how she had known about his connection to Finch, and more importantly, whose side she was actually on. The intercom on his desk buzzed. "Mr. Meyer, the Consul General would like to see you." Martin Fuller, the Consul General, was not a man who typically took notice of Nick. When Nick entered his wood-paneled office, Fuller was standing by the window, hands clasped behind his back. "Meyer, I have a task for you. The East Germans are allowing a small delegation to visit Leipzig next week for their trade fair. I want you on it." "Of course, sir. This is strictly diplomatic. You'll be representing our commercial interests. Nothing more." "Understood." The emphasis made Nick's skin prickle. "Did Fuller suspect something?" "Perfectly clear, sir." "Good. Because we've had some concerns about unauthorized contacts across the sector border. I'd hate to discover anyone from my mission was involved in something inappropriate." Nick maintained his bland expression. "As would I, sir." Fuller studied him for a moment longer than necessary. "Dismissed." Nick spent the rest of the day going through the motions of his official duties while his mind raced. The timing was terrible. With Finch compromised and suspicions rising on both sides, he should be cooling his operations. Instead, he was being sent directly into East Germany. That evening, he visited one of the few remaining crossing points at Checkpoint Charlie. As a diplomat, he still had the privilege of crossing into East Berlin, though the process had become more cumbersome since the wall went up. The East German border guards examined his diplomatic passport with exaggerated care, making him wait nearly 30 minutes before allowing him through. The message was clear: you are tolerated, not welcomed. Once across, the contrast was immediate. While West Berlin glowed with neon and reconstruction, East Berlin remained dim, many buildings still showing war damage 16 years after the fighting had ended. Nick walked purposefully down Unter den Linden, past the Soviet embassy, before turning onto a side street. The small cafe was nearly empty. Nick ordered coffee in German and took a seat facing the door. 10 minutes later, a heavy-set man in a worn suit entered, ordered a beer, and sat 3 tables away. Neither acknowledged the other. When Nick went to the bathroom, he left his newspaper on the table. The man picked it up after he left. Inside was a small note with a single question: "Who is Natalia Geller?" Nick returned, paid, and departed. 2 hours later, he found a matchbook on the ledge of a phone booth he passed on his regular walking route. Inside was a message written in tiny, precise handwriting. "Not one of ours. Possible Stasi counterintelligence. Extreme caution." On the day of the Leipzig delegation departure, Nick arrived at Tempelhof Airport carrying a small suitcase with diplomatic seals that exempted it from searches. The other members of the delegation, 2 commerce officials and a cultural affairs officer, were already waiting at the small private terminal. As they boarded the plane, Nick noticed a familiar figure at the departure gate, Natalia Geller. She nodded almost imperceptibly as he passed. He gave no indication of recognition. The trade fair in Leipzig was a showcase of communist bloc achievements, industrial machinery, consumer goods that were rarely available in actual stores, and technological innovations that lagged years behind their Western counterparts. Nick dutifully attended the required functions, took notes on East German manufacturing capabilities, and maintained his cover as a boring economic analyst. On the second evening, during a concert at the Gewandhaus, he found himself seated next to Natalia. "Enjoying the Bach, Mr. Meyer?" she whispered as the orchestra played. "Very much. Though I prefer Beethoven." "Ah, the revolutionary. That doesn't surprise me." They sat in silence through the remainder of the first movement. "There's a man who needs to leave the East," she said, her voice barely audible. "A scientist. He has information about a new surveillance system being developed for the wall. Microphones embedded in the ground to detect tunneling. Automated trigger mechanisms." Nick kept his eyes on the orchestra. "Why tell me?" "Because 16 people were shot trying to cross last month. Because he wants his children to grow up free." "And why should I trust you?" "Meet him. Tomorrow. The Thomaskirche at noon. He'll be wearing a gray coat with a red book in his pocket. His name is Dr. Klaus Weber." The name sent a shock through Nick. Weber was known in intelligence circles, a physicist whose work had suddenly disappeared from academic journals 3 years earlier, presumably redirected to classified projects. "If this is a trap." "It's not." Her hand briefly touched his in the darkness. "I'm risking everything too." The Thomaskirche stood as it had for centuries, a testament to permanence in a divided city. Nick arrived early, positioning himself near a pillar that offered a view of both entrances. He had spent the morning conducting counter-surveillance measures, doubling back on his route, entering and exiting shops, watching reflections in windows for followers. At precisely noon, a thin man in a gray coat entered, clutching a red book. He moved to a pew and sat, head bowed as if in prayer. Nick waited 5 minutes, scanning for any sign of surveillance, before approaching. He sat beside the man without looking at him. "The acoustics here are remarkable," he said in German. "Bach would be pleased." "It's the vaulted ceiling," Weber replied, the agreed-upon response. "It carries the sound to heaven." For 20 minutes, they sat in apparent contemplation while Weber whispered his story. He had been forced to work on border security technologies after attempting to publish research abroad. Now, with the wall, he feared he would never escape, and his children would grow up in a system he despised. "I can provide details on every security installation along the wall, patrol schedules, blind spots, and the new technologies they're developing. But I need guarantees. For my family, not just myself." Nick made no promises he couldn't keep. Getting 4 people out would be complicated. "Not 4. 3. Weber's voice broke slightly. "My wife died last year. Cancer. It's just me and my daughters now." Nick felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about intelligence anymore. It was about lives. "I'll see what can be arranged, but it will take time." "We don't have much time." I've been reassigned to a facility near Moscow. We leave in 3 weeks. As they parted, Weber slipped the red book, a collection of Goethe's poems, into Nick's coat pocket. A gift to remember our conversation. That night, in his hotel room, Nick carefully examined the book. Between pages 42 and 43 was a thin sheet of onionskin paper covered with technical diagrams and notations, the first installment of Weber's intelligence. Nick photographed the document using a miniature camera disguised as a cigarette lighter, then replaced it in the book. The film would return to West Berlin hidden in a specially designed hollowed-out belt buckle, a standard diplomatic courier technique. When the delegation returned to Berlin 2 days later, Nick was stopped at the checkpoint by an East German border officer he hadn't seen before. "Your passport, please." Nick handed over his diplomatic passport, maintaining a bored expression despite his racing heart. "Please step inside for additional verification." The small interrogation room contained only a metal table and 2 chairs. Nick sat calmly, though the book in his briefcase felt like it was radiating heat. After 20 minutes, a new officer entered, older, with the unmistakable bearing of Stasi. "Mr. Meyer, I apologize for the delay. There seems to be some confusion about your diplomatic status." "There's no confusion. My credentials are in order." The man smiled thinly. "Of course, but we've had reports of diplomats engaging in activities inconsistent with their official duties. I'm sure you understand our concern. I understand that detaining a diplomat is a violation of international protocols." For 2 hours they engaged in this dance. Veiled accusations met with bureaucratic responses. Nick maintained his cover, showing appropriate diplomatic indignation without the panic of a spy caught in the act. Finally, seemingly satisfied, they released him. As Nick crossed into West Berlin, he spotted Natalia watching from a distance, her face unreadable. Back in his apartment, Nick carefully extracted the film and prepared it for transfer to his CIA contact. As he worked, he considered the risks he was now taking. Helping a defector was far beyond his authorized activities. If caught, neither the State Department nor the CIA would acknowledge his actions. But the intelligence Weber offered could save lives, both in terms of military significance and by helping others escape. And there were the children to consider. His principles had always been clear. Expose the truth, help those trapped behind the wall, undermine the regime that kept people captive. But now, those principles would be tested against his survival instinct. The next morning, Nick placed a call to a bookstore in West Berlin, a signal to his CIA handler that they needed to meet. That afternoon, he browsed records at a shop in Charlottenburg, where a middle-aged American tourist accidentally bumped into him. "Pardon me," said Norman Coleman, a CIA officer operating under commercial cover. They moved to the classical music section, pretending to discuss Bach recordings while speaking quietly. "I have something significant," Nick said. "Technical specifications for new wall security measures. And a potential defector, high value." Coleman's expression remained neutral, but his eyes sharpened. "Who?" "Klaus Weber, physicist, working on automated security systems. Weber is priority, but extraction with family complicates things. He won't come without his daughters." Coleman sighed. "I'll pass it up the chain. No promises." Nick handed over the film canister in a brush pass as they reached for the same record. "There's something else." An East German cultural attaché named Natalia Geller made contact. She facilitated the meeting with Weber. Coleman went still. "Described how?" Nick provided a detailed description. "We have no assets by that name or description. Could be Stasi trying to compromise you. Or KGB. Or..." He paused. "Or someone new trying to make contact. We'll run her through the system." As weeks passed, Nick continued his diplomatic duties while waiting for word about Weber. He made 2 more trips into East Berlin, each time taking extraordinary precautions to ensure he wasn't followed. During a diplomatic reception at the British Embassy, he received his answer when Coleman brushed past him at the bar. Weber is approved. Highest level. But we need more from him first, complete documentation, not just the overview. And we need to verify his access. Arrange another meeting. Getting a message to Weber proved difficult. Nick couldn't risk approaching his home or workplace directly. He finally resorted to using a classified advertisement in a Western newspaper that circulated in limited quantities in East Berlin, a method so old it had come back around to being effective. The ad, ostensibly selling classical records, contained a coded message with a meeting location and time. 3 days later, Nick sat on a bench in Treptower Park, watching Soviet War memorial visitors come and go. Weber appeared exactly on time, walking slowly as if admiring the monuments. When he sat beside Nick, Weber looked significantly more haggard than at their first meeting. "I'm being watched," he said without preamble. "My supervisor questioned me about my movements during the Leipzig fair." Nick felt a chill. "Have you been followed here?" "I took precautions. But we don't have much time." Weber slipped a package from inside his coat. Complete documentation of the system, including the Moscow facility plans. Nick took the package. "My people have approved your request, but they need time to prepare. 2 weeks minimum." Weber closed his eyes briefly. "Our departure for Moscow has been moved up. 10 days from now. I'll see what can be done." As Weber stood to leave, he gripped Nick's shoulder. "If anything happens to me, promise you'll still try to get my daughters out. They're all that matters now." Nick nodded, the weight of the promise settling uncomfortably on his conscience. That night, as Nick prepared to transfer the new intelligence, someone knocked on his apartment door. He quickly secured the documents in his hidden compartment before checking the peephole. Natalia Geller stood in the hallway, her face pale and drawn. Nick opened the door cautiously, his hand near the weapon he kept hidden in an umbrella stand. "Weber has been arrested," she said as soon as the door closed behind her. "This afternoon after your meeting." Nick felt the blood drain from his face. "How do you know about the meeting?" "Because I've been helping him prepare for weeks." Her composure cracked slightly. "And now they have him and they'll make him talk." "Why are you really involved in this, Natalia? Who do you work for?" She sank onto his couch, suddenly looking exhausted. "I work for the Ministry of Culture officially. Unofficially, I've been helping people escape for nearly 2 years. Alone? That's not possible. Not entirely alone. There are others, East Germans, West Germans, even a few Russians who believe this division is wrong." She looked up at him. "People like you who can't stand by and watch." Nick remained standing, maintaining distance. "Weber's daughters? Safe for now. With their grandmother. But once Weber talks..." "He won't talk. Everyone talks, Nicholas. You know that. The only question is how long he'll hold out." Nick paced the small living room. Weber's intelligence was critical. It would expose vulnerabilities in the East German border security system that could help dozens of escape attempts. But the man himself and his children were now in immediate danger. "I need to contact my people," he said finally. "There's no time." Natalia stood. "The children must be moved tonight, before the Stasi connects them to their father's activities. And you expect me to trust you with this? For all I know, you're the one who betrayed him." Her eyes flashed with anger. "If I wanted to betray anyone, you would already be in Hohenschönhausen prison. I came to you because you're the only person with connections who might help those girls." Nick studied her face, looking for deception. He had been trained to spot lies, to never trust, to always assume the worst. But he had also been trained to make impossible decisions based on incomplete information. How would we even get them out? The wall. Not the wall. The sewer system. There's a section near Bernauerstrasse where the drainage system crosses the border. The access points are guarded, but I have keys to a maintenance entrance. It was exactly the kind of information that could be used to lure him into a trap. Yet if she was telling the truth and he did nothing, 2 innocent children would pay the price for their father's actions. If this is legitimate, why haven't you used this escape route before? We have, 3 times. But the last group was nearly caught. We believe there may be a leak in our network, so we've been saving this route for an emergency. She stepped closer to him. This is that emergency. Nick made his decision. I'll help, but I need to send a message to my contact first. There's no 10 minutes. That's all I need. While Natalia waited anxiously, Nick wrote a brief message with Weber's status and the rescue attempt details, including their planned route. If he disappeared, at least his people would know why. He left the note in a prearranged dead drop location, inside a loose brick in the garden wall behind his apartment building. They moved through the darkened streets of West Berlin in silence, taking a circuitous route to ensure they weren't followed. At Bernauerstrasse, they met a young German man who introduced himself only as Peter, Natalia's contact on the western side. The entrance is here, Peter whispered, pointing to what appeared to be an ordinary utility cover in a secluded area near the wall. Once they come through, we need to move them immediately to the safe house. Nick positioned himself as lookout while Peter worked on the heavy metal cover. The night was cold, their breath forming clouds in the autumn air. How exactly are they getting to this side? Nick asked Natalia. There's a network of people. The grandmother will deliver them to a contact who works in the sewer maintenance department. He'll bring them through. It sounded plausible, but Nick remained skeptical. Every instinct from his training screamed that this was too rushed, too dangerous. They waited in tense silence for nearly an hour. Finally, they heard faint sounds from below. Peter quickly opened the cover, and a moment later, a filthy, exhausted-looking man emerged, followed by 2 small girls, perhaps 8 and 10 years old. Both looked terrified, their faces streaked with grime and tears. The older girl clutched a small suitcase, while the younger held tightly to a worn teddy bear. Natalia rushed forward, speaking softly in German. It's all right now. You're safe. These men will help you. The sewer worker spoke rapidly to Peter, who translated for Nick. He says the Stasi came to the grandmother's house just as they were leaving. They barely got away. Nick knelt before the girls. We're going to take you somewhere safe, he said in gentle German. The older girl looked at him with eyes too knowing for her age. Is our father coming? Nick exchanged a glance with Natalia. We're working on that, he said, the lie bitter on his tongue. They split up to avoid attention. Peter took the sewer worker to a different location, while Nick and Natalia escorted the children to a safe house in Kreuzberg, a nondescript apartment maintained by Peter's group of escape helpers. An elderly couple received them, quickly ushering the girls into a bath and providing clean clothes. Nick watched as Natalia helped the younger girl wash her hair, speaking soothingly the entire time. What happens to them now? He asked when she rejoined him in the small kitchen. They'll stay here for a few days until we can arrange proper documentation. Then they'll be moved again, probably to Bavaria initially, then perhaps out of Germany entirely. And Weber, Natalia's expression darkened. If he hasn't already, he'll likely confess to espionage under interrogation. The Stasi will make an example of him. We need to get him out too. She shook her head. Hohenschönhausen is impenetrable, and they'll be expecting some rescue attempt. Nick knew she was right. The Stasi's central prison was a fortress, designed specifically to break political prisoners. Still, the thought of leaving Weber behind felt like a betrayal. I need to report this to my people. They'll want to debrief the girls, find out what Weber might have told the Stasi. These are children, not intelligence assets, Natalia snapped. They've just lost their father. They need protection, not interrogation. I understand that, but there are larger considerations. The information Weber provided is more important than his life, than his children's trauma. The accusation stung because it contained an element of truth. The intelligence community always prioritized information over individuals. Nick had accepted that bargain when he entered this world. But now, facing two terrified children, the calculation felt colder than he could bear. I'll make sure they're treated with care, he said finally. But my people need to be involved. Natalia studied him, then nodded reluctantly. Tomorrow. Let them rest tonight. Nick returned to his apartment near dawn, exhausted and troubled. He had arranged to meet Coleman the next day, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something about the entire operation felt wrong. Why had Weber been arrested so quickly after their meeting? How had Natalia known about it almost immediately? And why was she, ostensibly an East German cultural official, so deeply involved in an escape network? He was still pondering these questions when there was a sharp knock at his door. Nick checked his watch. 5:30 a.m. Too early for a casual visit. He retrieved his pistol from its hiding place before approaching the door cautiously. Through the peephole, he saw Martin Fuller, the consul general, and two men he recognized as security officers from the embassy. Meyer, open up. Now. When Nick opened the door, Fuller pushed past him into the apartment, his face grave. Nicholas Meyer, I'm instructing you to pack a bag immediately. You're being removed from your post and returned to Washington. Sir? May I ask why? East German authorities have named you as an accomplice in the escape of two children last night. They're claiming you're a CIA operative who helped kidnap the daughters of a prominent scientist. Fuller's eyes were cold. Is there something you'd like to tell me, Meyer? Nick maintained his composure despite the shock. I believe these accusations are fabricated, sir. Are they? Because we also received an urgent communication from our friends across the river. By friends, Nick knew he meant the CIA station. They seem very interested in your extracurricular activities. One of the security officers began searching the apartment while the other stood by the door. You have 30 minutes to pack essential items. You'll be on the military transport leaving at 0700. Sir, there are matters here that require my attention. Your attention is no longer required in Berlin, Meyer. You've compromised this mission and potentially endangered legitimate operations. The security officer searching the apartment approached Fuller and whispered something. Fuller's expression darkened further. Where is the material you received from Dr. Weber? Nick felt a chill run through him. He had hidden Weber's documents in his secret compartment, but there was a duplicate set in the embassy's classified vault. Standard procedure for high-value intelligence. I placed it in the secure vault yesterday, as per protocol. Fuller studied him for a long moment. The vault was accessed at 2:17 a.m. The material is missing. Nick's mind raced. He had been with the children and Natalia at that time. That's impossible. I was nowhere near the embassy. Then someone used your access code. Care to explain that? Before Nick could respond, the security officer returned from the bedroom, holding the false bottom drawer from Nick's desk. The compartment was open and empty. Sir, you need to see this. Fuller examined the hidden compartment, then turned to Nick with undisguised disgust. Pack your things, Meyer. Your career in the diplomatic corps is over. On the military transport back to Washington, Nick sat in stunned silence, trying to piece together what had happened. The documents were gone, his cover was blown, and Weber was in Stasi custody. Worst of all, he had no idea what had happened to the girls. Had Natalia betrayed him? It seemed the most likely explanation. She could have copied his access code somehow, then used it to remove the duplicate documents while he was distracted with the children. But why orchestrate the rescue at all? Why not simply arrest him during his meeting with Weber? The questions plagued him throughout the flight and the subsequent debriefing at CIA headquarters in Langley. For 3 days, he was interrogated by increasingly senior officers, each one more skeptical than the last. "Let me get this straight," said Richard Helms, the director of plans, during the final session. "You trusted an unvetted East German contact to lead you to a high-priority asset, then participated in an unauthorized extraction operation, resulting in the compromise of critical intelligence and the arrest of the asset?" Nick had no defense that wouldn't sound naive. "I believed the children were in imminent danger. And now Weber is being interrogated by the Stasi. His intelligence is compromised, and you've blown 3 years of careful positioning in Berlin." Helms sighed. "The only reason you're not facing more severe consequences is that some of Weber's initial intelligence made it through and appears genuine." "What about the girls? Were they safely relocated?" Helms' expression softened slightly. "They've been moved to a secure location. Beyond that, I can't say." "And Weber?" "The East Germans announced his arrest this morning. They're charging him with espionage and attempted defection, which meant execution or at best life in prison." Nick felt sick. "There's one more thing," Helms added. "This woman, Natalia Geller. Our records show no East German cultural attaché by that name matching your description." "Then who was she?" "That's what we'd like to know." Helms slid a folder across the table. "Because 2 days after you left Berlin, this woman crossed at Checkpoint Charlie using Swiss diplomatic credentials. She requested political asylum." The photograph showed Natalia, dressed differently but unmistakable. "She's asking to speak with you, Meyer. Only you." Nick felt as if the ground had shifted beneath him. "Is she in custody?" "Protective custody at a safe house in Virginia. She's brought something with her that has everyone very interested. Microfilm containing what appears to be the complete technical specifications for the Soviet Union's border security systems. Not just East Germany, but the entire western border from the Baltic to the Black Sea. Weber's research. And more. Far more. Material that Weber couldn't possibly have had access to." Helms studied Nick carefully. "She claims to be KGB, a deep-cover illegal who's been operating in East Germany for 6 years." Nick struggled to process this revelation. "She used me. Perhaps. Or perhaps she saw in you someone who could help accomplish her objective." Helms closed the folder. "We'd like you to speak with her. Find out what her real agenda is." The safe house was a modest colonial on a quiet street in McLean, Virginia. Nick was escorted through multiple security checkpoints before being led to a comfortable sitting room where Natalia waited. She looked different, her severe hairstyle replaced by a softer cut, her drab East German clothing exchanged for a simple American dress. But her eyes were the same, intelligent, wary, and somehow sad. "Nicholas," she said, rising as he entered. "Thank you for coming. Did I have a choice?" He remained standing, maintaining distance. "We always have choices. That's what I learned after 6 years in the KGB." She gestured to a chair. "Please sit. I owe you an explanation." Reluctantly, Nick sat across from her. 2 CIA officers observed from behind a one-way mirror, he knew. "My real name is Natasha Gorsky," she began. "I was recruited by the KGB in 1955 while studying at Moscow University. They trained me for 3 years before placing me in East Germany as a deep-cover illegal." "Your mission?" "Initially, to monitor East German scientific developments and ensure they were properly shared with Moscow. Later, to identify potential defectors before they could be approached by Western intelligence. She smiled faintly. I was very good at my job. Including Weber? Her smile faded. Weber was different. I identified him as a flight risk, yes. But when I interviewed him, I saw a man who simply wanted his children to have opportunities he never would. It affected me. So you decided to help him defect rather than report him? Not immediately. I spent months considering my options. She leaned forward. Nicholas, do you know what it's like to spend years enforcing a system you've come to despise? To watch families torn apart by a wall? To see the fear in people's eyes when they hear a knock at night? Nick said nothing, but he understood better than she knew. His own disillusionment had been growing with each passing year, as he witnessed both sides manipulate and sacrifice individuals for ideological advantage. I made my decision last year, Natalia continued. I would use my position to help key scientists escape, while simultaneously gathering intelligence that would eventually buy my own freedom in the West. And I was just a convenient tool. Her eyes flashed. You were a man of principle in a world of pragmatists. Yes, I used you, but for something you already believed in. What happened to Weber? Her expression grew somber. He was arrested because there was a surveillance team watching the park. Not because of you or me, but because the Stasi had already suspected him after an unrelated security review. And the missing documents? My access code. I needed insurance. Something valuable enough to guarantee my reception in the West. She held his gaze. I memorized your code when you accessed the embassy vault during the Leipzig trip. I was 3 people behind you in line. Nick felt a chill at how easily she had compromised him. The children. Safe. They're with a family in Canada now, with new identities. Her voice softened. I made sure of that before I came in. Nick studied her, seeing for the first time not just the calculated operative but the woman who had risked everything to save 2 children and escape a system she no longer believed in. Why tell me all this? You could have maintained your cover story. Because I'm tired of lies, Nicholas. And because... She hesitated. Because I think we're more alike than different. We both tried to hold onto some principles in a profession that discourages them. Nick thought of his shattered career, of Weber in a Stasi cell, of the countless others caught in the machinery of the Cold War. He had entered intelligence work believing he could make a difference, that the truth mattered. Now he wasn't sure what he believed anymore. What happens now? He asked finally. I'll be debriefed for months, possibly years. The intelligence I've brought is significant. She smiled sadly. And you? What will you do? Nick hadn't considered his future. His diplomatic career was over, his position in intelligence compromised. I don't know, he admitted. They'll want you back, you know. Not as a diplomat, but in some capacity. Good field operatives are rare. She was right. Despite his disgrace, his skills and experience remained valuable. He could return to the shadows, perhaps under deeper cover. Before he could respond, the door opened and a senior CIA officer entered. Time's up, Meyer. Nick stood, suddenly reluctant to leave. Despite everything, Natalia, or Natasha, was perhaps the only person who truly understood what the past weeks had meant. Good luck, he said simply. You too, Nicholas. Her eyes held his for a moment longer than necessary. Perhaps someday, when this war ends, we can meet again as ourselves. October 3, 1991, Berlin. Nicholas Meyer stood among the crowds celebrating the first anniversary of German reunification. The wall had been down for nearly 2 years now, its concrete segments sold as souvenirs or displayed in museums around the world. He was older now, his hair graying at the temples, lines etched around his eyes from 3 decades in government service. After Berlin, he had indeed returned to intelligence work, though never again in the field. Instead, he had become an analyst, then an instructor at the farm, teaching a new generation about the Cold War's lessons. As he watched Berliners dancing in the streets that had once been divided by barbed wire and concrete, he felt a tap on his shoulder. "You came," said a familiar voice. Natasha Gorsky looked different. 30 years had passed, after all, but her eyes were the same. "Your message said it was important," he replied. After her defection, she had spent 5 years being debriefed before being settled with a new identity. They had seen each other occasionally during professional consultations, but always with the walls of their respective roles between them. "Walk with me," she said. They strolled through the Brandenburg Gate, once a symbol of division, now a monument to reunification. "I wanted you to be here for this," she said, leading him to a small cafe near Potsdamer Platz. Inside, 2 women waited at a table, one in her late 30s, the other slightly younger. Nick stopped in the doorway, recognition dawning slowly. The older woman's eyes. He had seen them before, in a terrified child clutching a suitcase 30 years ago. "Ilse and Emma Weber," Natasha said softly. "They asked to meet the man who helped save them." The women rose as they approached. The older one, Ilse, extended her hand. "Mr. Meyer," she said in perfect English. "My sister and I have waited a long time to thank you properly." Nick took her hand, emotion tightening his throat. "I didn't do much." "You risked everything," said Emma, the younger sister. "Our grandmother told us the whole story before she died." They sat together, ordering coffee as the sisters shared their story. Their new life in Canada, their education, their careers. Ilse was a physicist like her father, Emma a human rights attorney. "Did you ever learn what happened to our father?" Ilse asked finally. Nick exchanged a glance with Natasha. He was sentenced to 20 years for espionage. But when relations began to thaw in the late 80s, he was part of a prisoner exchange. He died in 1989, just 3 months before the wall fell. The sisters nodded, having suspected as much. "But his work lived on," Emma said. "The technical specifications he smuggled out, they helped expose vulnerabilities in the border system, didn't they?" "They did," Natasha confirmed. "In total, those documents helped over 200 people escape across the wall over the next decade." As they talked into the evening, Nick reflected on the strange path that had brought them all to this moment. The Cold War had ended not with the bang many had feared, but with the collective will of ordinary people demanding freedom. Weber's sacrifice had not been in vain. His children had grown up free, and his intelligence, the 200 secrets smuggled across the wall, had helped others find their own freedom. Later, as he and Natasha walked through the reunified city, she slipped her hand into his. "Any regrets?" she asked. Nick thought of his shattered diplomatic career, the years of doubt and compromise that followed, the human cost of the Cold War's ideological battle. "Many," he admitted, "but not today." Above them, the Berlin sky was clear and unbroken, no longer divided by ideologies or walls, just as it should have been all along.